The topic today is actually Zen, words, and also the wordless. What is Zen? Actually, there's really not much to say. And there are some famous examples of where the Zen teacher would prepare a talk or would prepare for a talk, and everyone else was prepared to hear a talk, but there was no talk given. There was this master who was actually a lay teacher within the Chan tradition, the Chinese Zen tradition. And this teacher's name was Fu Dashi, Master Fu. And he lived around the time of Bodhidharma. And that period of time in China, I think, was the 5th century. And the emperor was Liang Wudi. There are also lots of stories of this emperor and his interaction with Bodhidharma, who is known as the first ancestor of the Zen lineage, the Chan lineage. And there was one occasion where Master Fu was invited by the emperor to give a talk on the Diamond Sutra, which is a very well-known teaching of the Buddha, which is important for Zen. So you can imagine the emperor invited this teacher to give a lecture. So this is no joke. When the emperor invites you, you show up and you give a teaching. So there they were, the emperor. There was also the emperor's teacher. The emperor supposedly was learning Buddhism, also doing a lot to support Buddhism at that time, building monasteries, supporting this whole uh, institution of Buddhism. So he was a big supporter, and he was also a student. As the stories go, though, the emperor may not have been the best student, but we'll leave that aside. The emperor was there, teachers, there was probably an audience of other people. I don't remember how many, but again, this is the imperial quarters or the imperial palace. And Master Fu goes up to the platform, which is the place where the talk is given. He sits, and there's some things on the table. There's a few objects usually that are on a table of a Zen master. And one of these things was described as like I don't know how to describe it, kind of like a ruler, or it's a symbolic object. And Master Fu got up to the platform, sat, grabbed this object, raised it, put it down. I think he may have actually slammed it or made a sound on the table. And then he got down from the platform and walked off. That was the talk. There was no talk given. And the emperor goes to his teacher. He's like, "What was that?" And the teacher asks him, "Emperor, did you understand?" He's like, "No, I didn't get it." Master Fu was trying to give a teaching of what does the Diamond Sutra have to say? And possibly he was saying, what does all of Buddhism have to say? Interestingly, there is one line within the Diamond Sutra where the Buddha says that for all of these 40 years that I've been giving teachings and instructions about the practice, about the Dharma, I haven't said anything. "40 years of teaching, traveling, walking on foot, to bring a message to people so that people could themselves have the same experience and insight of the Buddha, which was an insight that allowed him to be free of confusion, free of agitation, and free of any kind of anxiety or fear, even the deepest fears that I think all of us have. Some of the deepest fears are about losing our life, and losing those that are dear to us, the inevitable that we all have to experience. The Buddha found himself, through insight, liberated from these fears. And the Buddha made a great effort to share his message and to share his insight. But he even said, over all these years, he didn't say a single thing. Now, what's that about? Zen also borrows this very important message of the Buddha, which is a lot of words can be used, a lot of things can be said, but ultimately, nothing can be said. All the words and the sayings, the teachings are just guidelines, they're just instructions. They're not they're not supposed to be used as just knowledge for the sake of accumulating information. But whatever the Buddha said, and whatever generations of teachers have said, all of these things are instructions and they're to be used, they're to be applied so that we can experience what the Buddha experienced. It's not just to have a bunch of ideas to somehow know something about ourselves or the world intellectually. That could be somewhat useful, but in trying to deal with all of the stress, anxiety, fears, confusion, and difficulties of our life, knowledge can only go so far. Knowledge can help a little bit, but ultimately, it can't relieve us from those troubles. In Chinese, the term for all of these troubles that I listed is 烦恼. The English that we usually use is vexation. Knowledge can't save us from vexation. Only practice or only insight can relieve these vexations, these troubles of our mind. So Zen ultimately has nothing to say. There's nothing to say. It's something we need to live and experience. And when we live it and when we experience it, we can experience the same freedom that the Buddha experienced. We can experience that same lightness and ease of body and mind that comes from a mind that just doesn't worry, doesn't fear. But it's not a dead mind, a Zen mind or the Buddha's mind. It's not a dead mind, a deadened silence, some kind of state, some kind of meditative state. It's not about meditative states. The Buddha's mind or the Buddha mind Sometimes in Zen, it's just called the mind of suchness. This is not a dead mind, it's a lively mind. It's a way of being that's without worry, without stress, that's at ease in all situations, even in the face of death, life and death situations. It's a liberated mind. It's liberated from vexations, but it's still an active mind. Active meaning it can respond to the needs of whoever needs help, whoever needs to hear the message that can bring them insight, the Buddha, or a person with wisdom, a person with this freed mind, freed of vexation, they just respond very naturally as if our left hand is cut, or if we hurt our left hand, our right hand comes to take care of it. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh often used that analogy. I think it's perfect. When we hurt our left hand, our right hand just comes to help very naturally. Our right hand doesn't say, what are you doing? You're always getting into trouble. I have to help you again? Or I don't have time to help you. The right hand just helps. But it helps in an appropriate way. If our right hand is helping the left hand and it gets stuck to it, or the right hand won't let go and it needs to let go, we need to do something with our right hand, that's not a skillful response. And we don't usually do that. Our right hand comes to help the left hand. We wash it, we put a bandage. We may need to put pressure on it for a while if it's a serious cut, but at some point we need to let go, bandage, do something to it. And the right hand needs to let go to take care of other things. When we have wisdom, we also have what's called compassion. The wise mind or the Zen mind responds with wisdom and compassion to circumstances. So it compassionately comes to help without any complaints or grievances, but it knows how to help in an appropriate way so it doesn't cause more trouble for the left hand or for the right hand. This wisdom and compassion is something that we actually all have. Every single one of us has the same capacity for wisdom and compassion, just like the Buddha. It's just that we're often burdened. We're often burdened by words. We're often burdened by our own words and our own thoughts. So that most of the day, most of our waking lives, our mind is very busy. The words and the thoughts in our mind have become so busy that it's just noise. It's agitation and the noise of thoughts, thinking, words, sentences, language, stories. Is that true? Do you experience that? Or is it just me? That a lot of our time is spent with a busy mind. So if we didn't say anything, today if I agreed to Warren to give a talk and I just showed up and didn't say anything, I don't think Warren would be happy. You folks may not be happy. I plan to give a talk. I should give a talk. Master Fu, maybe he realized it was too much. It was too much talking. It was time to give the emperor a break and time to give the emperor a lesson to help the emperor see that Buddhism, Zen, cannot be found in the words. It actually needs to be found outside of the words, in the emperor's lived experience, in our lived experience. So it's important to still talk. It's important to still use words. Just like the Buddha did over his 40 years of teaching, he didn't stop talking, even though he knew that in order for people to get his message, they would have to go outside of words. They would have to go beyond words and experience it for themselves. And so he kept talking. So the wordless side of Zen, which in there's a teaching called the awakening of faith in the Mahayana. Uh, it says that suchness, which is another word for reality, suchness, just things as such, is beyond words. That's one aspect of it. There's suchness beyond words, reality beyond words. But then there's also suchness that it can be expressed in words, where we use words as a tool to help us become unentangled from words. So, since in our minds we're often busied with words and language, thoughts and thinking, we often need more words, more thoughts and thinking to help us become uh, unentangled. So, in Zen, words are a method or a tool as opposed to some kind of ultimate truth. This is really the message of all of Buddhism. However, over time, as Buddhism developed, there were people and there were groups of Buddhists, uh, sects, or groups of certain kinds of thinking who they eventually seemed to drift from that original intention of the Buddha, from experiencing what the words are pointing to. They tried to find some description to capture the reality that the Buddha was talking about, and they lost their way. They got caught in words. So over time, uh, the birth of the Zen school arose out of the development of the scholastic and the doctrinal traditions of Buddhism. So it's important to know a little bit about Buddha's history, and I won't go too much in detail, but it's important to know that the Zen school, which wasn't even really called the Zen school until generations after Bodhidharma, this first founding teacher. Bodhidharma was the 5th century, maybe the 6th century. During that period of time, and for some generations after, Buddhism in China had developed schools. And there were schools such as the Tiantai tradition, or the Huayan tradition, or the Madhyamaka tradition, which in China was called the Sanluanzhong, which focused on the teachings of prajna and wisdom. A particular group of scriptures called the prajna, or transcendental wisdom scriptures. The Tiantai school based its teachings mostly on the Lotus Sutra as this ultimate teaching of Buddhism. The Avatamsaka school based the most ultimate teaching as coming from the Avatamsaka Sutra, or the Flower Adornment Sutra. There were other schools, including a school based on precepts and discipline. And these schools developed a philosophy or a way to organize the philosophical tradition of Buddhism. Because there's so many teachings, there's so many sutras that were brought from India that when it came to China, the Chinese masters wanted to make sense of it all and organize it and create a system of understanding the Buddha's message, as well as the Chinese tradition has a habit of inclusiveness. So whatever teaching that was brought from Buddhism, the Chinese masters, the Tiantai masters, they found a way to make it all a part of this one greater teaching. They just categorized it and put it in a certain place so that people could understand, was this teaching a more basic, fundamental teaching, or was it this more deeper or complete teaching? Within that point of development in China, it's understandable that people became very scholastically focused in Buddhism. Although the master's intent was not to make people caught up in words, it's very natural that that's what happened. People became so caught up in words that they spent their time studying texts and not actually applying the teachings. So Chan was this reaction to an already scholastic tradition, a tradition of Buddhism that became so well developed and organized that almost everybody knew at least the basic teachings of Buddhism. Everybody meaning not only the monastics in the Buddhist tradition were well versed in Buddhism, but lay people, people who were um, farmers, people who were foresters, woodcutters, people who were selling food in the market. There's so many stories of uh, elderly women, grandma Chan masters, selling biscuits on the side of the road. And these elderly women would actually give teachings, not so formal, but there are many stories where the monastics would be traveling, and there's one story where this one monk stopped for a snack, and um, um, he said, "I'd like a snack, please," to the woman who owned um, the little, what do you call it, snack shop. And in Chinese, the word is 点心, which is interesting. This word literally means to point your mind at something. So a snack is not only food, but it's, in a way, snacks can be something for us to do, something to point our mind at. And the woman asked the monk, so if there's no mind, as it says in the Diamond Sutra, which mind do you want to point? And the monk didn't know what to say. She was giving him a teaching, giving him a lesson informally about the Dharma. So there were so many people who knew so much about Buddhism. It was a time for Bodhidharma to give a teaching to help people go beyond words. So Bodhidharma, who eventually became the founder of Zen, he was seen as the founder of this new tradition of Buddhism, which emphasizes practice. Bodhidharma had a message. Part of his message was not to rely on words. 不立文字. Not only not to rely on words, but to 不立文字 also has a meaning of to not establish words, or he wasn't there to establish another doctrine. There was already plenty of doctrine, schools of doctrine, and they were presenting their own perspective of Buddhism, and they were presenting the idea of what is the most ultimate view of Buddhism. Bodhidharma wasn't there to establish a new doctrine, and he was there to uh, transmit a teaching that's outside of Scripture. It's called 教外别传,不立文字,教外别传. So not to establish words, a new doctrine, but to transmit the Buddha's message outside of the Scriptures. He wasn't looking for a disciple to educate in terms of doctrine and then pass on the lineage to this person. He was looking for someone who was willing to practice and explore themselves. But that phrase um, has led to a lot of misunderstanding over the years, and especially in Western Zen, especially in Zen as it has been brought to America, and even in some places within China still. There's this idea that words are not necessary at all in Zen. Words are not even useful. And there are some traditions within Zen where they don't read the Dharma, or they don't read the teachings of the Buddha, and they just emphasize sitting. There's no need to read anything, just sit and become a Buddha. That's kind of an extreme. You don't see it too much these days, but there are some traditions and there are some people who have that kind of attitude. They feel Bodhidharma said it. He said, don't rely on words. This is outside of the scriptures, so who needs that stuff? And they read stories of Zen masters who, in some cases, they burned the scriptures. They burned scriptures, they threw away the teachings, they burned Buddha statues, and they say, look, these Zen masters, they didn't need these things. They didn't need the scriptures. They didn't need any of that. So why do we need that? Let's just sit and be a Buddha. That's a problem. That's actually a problem. And why? Because they're taking those words out of context. They forgot that Bodhidharma was reacting to people who were already well versed in the teachings of the Buddha. They already had a clear idea of what is the direction of practice, what is the purpose, what's the process, what can you expect along the path of not only intensive meditation, but what can you expect along the path of working with all of our vexations, working with all of our troubles, all of our deep fears and anxieties, as well as cravings and even hatred, discrimination. What's the process like? The people of Bodhidharma's time were very clear about all of that. They had the best map of Buddhism. They created extensive maps or um, structure to understand the Buddha's teaching. They were ready to not rely on words because they already have words as guidance. If we don't have any background or any understanding of Buddhism, which would mean we have no idea what is the purpose of Zen, what is the purpose of the Buddha, what is the purpose of Bodhidharma coming from India to China. If we have no idea, no concept of what is the purpose of practice, what is the process of practice, and we expect to just sit without thinking about anything, without having any prior knowledge, that's very dangerous. because we don't know what we're doing and we don't know where we're going. And there are many people who encounter Zen, who encounter this kind of teacher or teaching who just says to ignore the scriptures, ignore the Buddha's teaching, and just sit, just be a Buddha. It's dangerous because a person who doesn't know what they're doing or where they're going could actually end up anywhere. And I'm referring to a psychological condition. If a person doesn't know what they're doing with their mind and they're intensively meditating in silence, not only intensively meditating on a cushion, it's possible that they use this kind of anti-intellectualism towards their entire life, and they want to escape and just be quiet and just be silent all the time. A person can get themselves into a state of psychological isolation and suppression to the point where they can get sick, can get mentally sick, mentally ill when they started trying to free themselves from psychological illness, from troubles, vexations. So it's important to remember that although Bodhidharma said not to rely on words, he wasn't there to establish a new doctrine, and that Zen is actually to be found outside the scriptures, outside of words, it's important to remember that Bodhidharma brought with him the Lankavatara Sutra, which is a teaching that is quite a lengthy scripture. For those of you who don't know what the word sutra is just a word for, in Buddhism, that we use for a scripture or a teaching. Bodhidharma brought this very lengthy scripture called the Lankavatara, and he used it to teach people. It was the theoretical basis for Zen. It's a theoretical basis for understanding our mind, understanding how and why we suffer, as well as understanding how to free ourselves from that suffering, from those troubles. So Bodhidharma was known for saying also this phrase, 从禅出教，戒教悟宗, which means from Zen, or from the experience of Zen, or from the experience of one's Buddha mind, liberated mind, comes teaching or instruction. From the Buddha's experience, he gave a teaching, he shared a message. And 戒教悟宗 means that we use this message to awaken ourselves to the core principle. Zong can mean principle. Zong actually can also mean mind here. Can mean the core principle of our conscious being. So we have to remember that. Zen can't be found within words. Zen is a reaction to attachment to doctrine, but that Zen makes use of words to help us experience what the Buddha was pointing to. So it's important to use words. That's one thing. I think that message is clear. It's also important to have a method of practice. So within Zen, it's common and popular that people talk about not having anything to do. In Zen, when you sit, there's nothing to do. You just sit. And this is true to a certain extent. Within our tradition, which is from Master Shangyen, Master Shengyan taught something called silent illumination, which he described as the method of no method. Silent illumination refers to the quality of an awakened mind, the quality of this Buddha mind. It's at the same time clear, wakeful, while being silent or undisturbed. Again, it's not a dead silence, as I mentioned. Silence means not being disturbed, a mind with no more agitation, no more disturbance in the face of whatever we experience. We're perfectly clear about what we experience, there's no disturbance. So, whether it's something pleasant, something that we like to eat, something that's tasty, we're clearly aware of the taste of that food. For me, probably one of my favorite foods is pizza. When I eat pizza, sometimes it's hard just to eat 2 slices. 2 slices are probably enough, but I really want to have that third slice. So I'm clearly aware of the pizza, the taste of the pizza, but there's a little bit of craving that creeps in, and I just want to have that third piece. It's just right there. Nobody's eating it. You don't want it to go to waste. It's better to eat it when it's fresh. Come up with all kind of excuses to eat the third slice. Can you relate to that? Are there situations that are pleasant? We're clearly aware of them, but our mind is disturbed. It's moved by craving, and it's moved by all sorts of reasons for acting on our cravings. When things are unpleasant, say it's a kind of food that we don't like, but maybe we have to eat it, or maybe it's a medicine, something that's unpleasant to taste. We're clearly aware that it's just really unpleasant and we hate it. We hate having to eat this food. I don't know. Do you hate having to eat vegetables? Maybe some people hate having to eat their vegetables, but they know that, yeah, vegetables have vitamins and all that stuff, and I need fiber in order to be regular, and my doctor says I have to eat more of this stuff, but I hate it. Clearly aware that the food tastes not pleasant to us, and our mind is not silent. It's moved by hatred or anger, irritation. The mind that's silently illuminating, silently aware, we're clearly aware of how the food tastes. Could be pleasant, could be bitter or unpleasant. It also depends what we like. Maybe you like bitter, maybe you don't like sweet. But a mind that's silently illuminating is just clear of the flavor, whatever it is. The flavor, the texture, and if we have to eat it, we eat it. There's no disturbance, there's no dislike, anger. If it happens to be pleasant and we need to eat it, we still need to have food. So if it's pizza for lunch, we eat our pizza. But if 2 slices is enough, it's enough to be full, it's enough to have the nutrition we need, we can stop. We're not driven by craving to then eat more than we need. In principle, as the Lankavatara Sutra teaches, and as many Mahayana Buddhist teachings say, that the nature of our mind is Buddha, is silently illuminating. That's actually the basic nature of our mind. Every one of us has that same potential to experience whatever it is we're experiencing fully without any disturbance. That's our nature. But can we just be that way? Can you just sit when you sit and have a mind that's clearly aware and undisturbed? Can you live every day of your life in that same silence and clarity? In principle, it's our nature. In reality, because of all the habits and tendencies that we have buried or stored within our mind, that's not the reality for us. So we need a method. Most of us, most people need a method. Bodhidharma said that there are two basic approaches. One is that you just enter through principle, li ru, which means that you could just hear the teaching of the Buddha, maybe read a couple of words of the Lankavatara Sutra, and very quickly and immediately you can be in that way. You can have a shift of the way you experience the world so that you can just be that way. Your being is silently illuminating. But for most of us, it doesn't work that way. So we need the second approach. We need to enter through practice. 行入. So within Zen, again, a lot of people just say there's no need for a method, just sit. And that can work for some people. People who have already established a kind of stable and clear state of mind with little disturbance, little distracting thoughts, no troublesome, burdensome emotions. For some people, just sitting is good, and that works. Their mind continues to deepen and become more silent and yet clear. And when they respond to things, they respond to things very readily and appropriately. But for most of us, we need a method. We need something for us to do so that we can train our mind, so that we can take our mind, which is most likely in a very distracted, scattered kind of state, and concentrate it. And also develop more clarity, because in addition to being scattered, there's often times where we're just uh, unclear, whether it's from fatigue or from scatteredness. The clarity of our mind is lacking because of habits, because of the way we live our lives. We're either overly scattered on one extreme, possibly lazy, hazy minded on the other extreme, or oscillating in between both. At some point of the day, very agitated, very excitable, uh, more easily irritated, and then other parts of the day, duller, uh, not so clear. It's important to have a method, but some people still think, no, I don't need a method. So, what's that like? I think this is a great analogy to describe a person who needs a method, but who doesn't want to use a method because they say, oh, there's no need for a method in Zen. I'll just be Zen. I am Zen. Zen is my nature. But meanwhile, their mind is scattered, distracted, or hazy and lazy. To not use a method at this point, it's kind of like someone who wants to play jazz, but who never even learned scales, who've never learned basic classical technique, playing scales in different positions on the instrument, learning chords, learning chord progressions. And they say, I just want to play jazz. I want to play free jazz. And if you've ever heard free jazz, to some people, free jazz kind of sounds like noise. But free jazz is actually played well by people who have already trained in a foundation of their instrument. Not only the foundation, but they can play more traditional jazz, which has more structure. It has specific chord changes, chord structure. There are, you could say, right and wrong notes, even though it's much more free than than, we could say, classical, European classical music. Free jazz just goes beyond all that, breaks all the rules. So it can sound like noise. But those musicians of free jazz, they're very well trained in all the structures of music. They know what the rules are to break. And they're so well trained and well played that when they go free, when they play freely, it's it's music. And people with a trained ear can hear that they're not just creating chaos. It's very different than two untrained people, people untrained in music, just going and banging on the drums or just playing wild notes on a saxophone. To the trained ear, free jazz it's quite incredible how much skill is applied to it. It's just breaking a lot of rules. So people who approach Zen without uh, a proper foundation, and they approach Zen thinking that they don't need any method, they don't need any teachings. That's like the person who's jumping into free jazz without even having learned the instrument. That's it's just chaos. And our mind will most likely either remain in a chaotic state, or in some cases, our mind could become more chaotic because we could go in the wrong direction and again become sick. So Zen starts with structure. We need structure and we need a foundation. And it's important to remember again that in the Zen tradition, this was born at a time where Buddhism already had plenty of structure for methods of practice. Living in a monastery itself is a structure, a daily life structure, a very regimented structure of when to wake up, when to eat, uh, when to go to the fields and do work. Everything had a clear structure so that there was no need for um, making choices based on what I like, what I don't like, what I want to do, what I don't want to do, which is often how we live our lives, at least in our free time. In the monastery, you just did what needed to be done because you need to run the monastery. So that schedule, that daily life was structure. The guidelines of monastic life itself, the rules of monasticism, the etiquette of monasticism, how to sit when you eat, how to take your food, how to walk, with what kind of posture to walk. All of these guidelines on how to live day-to-day life was was there in the monastic tradition. Methods of meditation were taught. You were surely taught how to meditate at the monastery. And there's a method to it. Posture, the posture itself, is an important foundation. If we don't even have a good posture, how could we sit for long? So, posture itself is part of the method. Um, all of these different methods create a foundation for us to eventually be able to be so free that we don't need any method. When we have that foundation of a stable body and mind that comes from a regimented life, or at least a structured life, where we don't just follow our desires or our aversion, but we do what needs to be done. We have a structured life, and for lay people like us, we have fun time as well. We're not living in the monastery, but we can have a structured life where we know what to do at what time. Is it time to work? We work. Is it time for leisure? We have fun. But we don't mix things up. If we don't have structure in our life and we just let ourselves, well, it's work time, but let me just play for a little bit longer, or it's time for leisure, but I just want to work and get this done. Skip that plan we had with the family. Let me just work more. When we don't live with any structure, it's so easy for our mind to become more chaotic and for the tendencies of craving and aversion to become stronger. So, method, not only in terms of sitting meditation, but a method of a structured lifestyle with boundaries, all provide the basis for eventually being able to be free. You could say the free jazz of Zen, which is no method. No method is born from a foundation of method, or the mind that doesn't need a method is developed based on using a method or methods. So this is important to break apart the misconception that there's no need for any method in Zen. When you read teachings on Zen and stories of, there's actually no method, not much method mentioned at all in many of the Zen stories that are collected. We need to understand that behind that Zen story of just this interaction between teacher and student, where very quickly somebody gets enlightened, very quickly, suddenly, someone's mind becomes free. That whole experience was also based on a life of dedication to a method. That moment of enlightenment comes from a whole long process, dedicated process to a life of discipline and training, training the mind, training the body. So that this idea of sudden enlightenment, which is another misconception that uh, many people may have when they encounter Zen teachings, that, oh, Zen is like the shortcut. Zen is like the shortcut of Buddhism where you don't need to do anything. You just, I don't know, somebody hits you and you get enlightened. Or you just have to go and meet this teacher. This teacher can enlighten you. I mean, just look at all these Chan stories. The teacher just like hits the person, shouts at the person, and something happens. It must be the teacher. Or it must be some sort of energetic thing that's happening. Some people are focused on the mystical side of Buddhism, or a mix of the mystical parts of Buddhism and a mix of some other traditions that they just call themselves Zen. And they think enlightenment is just, there's some special shortcut or there's some special trick that a Zen master knows, so that it seems that the Zen master can just enlighten that person. And maybe it's the master's power. There were some retreats. I remember seeing a few years, it's actually 10 years ago, there was this American Zen teacher who started up something new outside of the formal Zen tradition. And they promoted this retreat where they guaranteed enlightenment. And it's kind of bizarre. If any of you have seen infomercials for like, I don't know, some sort of product, like a magic food processor, those really kind of silly and exaggerated infomercials where everyone's paid to react. So you have the people on stage selling the product, and you have the audience that's like, oh my God, this product is amazing. This is the most amazing food processor I've ever seen. It was like an infomercial for this Zen retreat where the teacher promoted this guaranteed enlightenment retreat, which cost like a few $1,000s. It was an incredible fee. But I guess that's the fee you have to pay for this special, fast, guaranteed enlightenment. And when I saw that, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And but it was an actual thing. It was promoted. People can fall for that if they have a misunderstanding that Zen has some shortcut, that can just make you enlightened, or the teacher has some power that can make you enlightened, or that you just need to read the right words or encounter the right passage for you to kind of like turn a switch in your brain and have a whole new experience of life, the liberation of the Buddha. It's important to know that that's definitely not the case. I think most of you watching this probably know that. But for some watching this, maybe you still have a secret wish that enlightenment will just happen to you, maybe just out of chance, or that you'll meet that right teacher who can enlighten you. And you're hoping that there's a shortcut. Some people uh, that I know think that drugs in combination with meditation can be the shortcut, where you just go through this experience using this particular substance. It's like a boost, rocket fuel, where you take the substance, you do the meditation, and you're more likely to have this earth shattering enlightenment. But that's a very dangerous way of thinking, because that actually goes against one of the basic tenets of Buddhism, which is cause and effect. There's no effect without the cause. There's no enlightenment without a cause for it. Although the mind of the Buddha, or the Buddha mind, the silently illuminating mind, is our nature. It's our basic inherent nature or capacity. It's not made by anything or created by anything. It's not a thing. It's just a capacity that's always there. It's just not functioning because of our vexation, because of our attachment. So, although enlightenment is not made by anything, it's not created by practice, if we don't practice, if we don't dedicate ourselves to the method of Buddhism, which is structured lifestyle, a clear meditation method, the instructions or the guidance of the teachings, which is 戒定慧, precepts or discipline, meditation, and wisdom. If we don't have that as the cause, if we don't train our mind in these ways, then our inherently enlightened nature won't work. It won't show itself. Our mind won't be awakened without a cause. In the Zen tradition, this nature of awakening, this naturally wakeful mind is analogous to a mirror that's covered in layers of dust and filth. The mirror always has this potential or capacity for reflecting, but when it's covered in filth, it's not going to reflect. So we need to work on polishing the mirror. If we don't clean the mirror, it won't reflect. Cleaning the mirror is the cause. All of these practices, concrete practices, all of this doing of Buddhism and of the concrete tradition of Zen, all of this doing is the cause. Enlightenment is the effect. And yes, it's sudden. Enlightenment is always sudden, as my teacher would say, but you really got to take your time with the practice. Enlightenment, when it happens, it's always sudden. You could say the strict meaning of enlightenment is when all of those impurities, all of the filth on top of the mirror is cleaned away. And the natural reflective quality of the mind is just it functions. Um, if we don't do that work, we won't have the capacity for that moment of enlightenment, which is always sudden. All of the cleaning takes time. When you get that final last speck of dust off, then suddenly the mirror is perfectly clean. It's like the moment where every last bit of agitation, confusion, and attachment is absent, and our mind reflects or it functions perfectly. Going back to that description of silent illumination, at that moment our mind is perfectly clear as to whatever we experience, but there's not even one speck or one uh, obstacle of craving or aversion or some sort of concept. So, the message that I wanted to share today, and hopefully that I got across, was that Zen really has nothing to say. There are no words that can capture the experience of Zen or the experience of the Buddha's mind, our own inherent capacity for wakefulness. There's nothing that can be said, but we need not only words to help us understand this path, the purpose of the path, the process of the path, but we also need methods. We need concrete ways to train our mind, to train our body, so that we develop a deeper and deeper calm and silence, less and less disturbance, and so that we develop more and more clarity, wakefulness, and awareness. We need methods. We need words as a guide. With these methods, with these words, we have stronger and stronger confidence. Confidence in ourselves that, yes, it is our nature to be wakeful. Even when we feel terrible, even when we feel that we're hopeless or helpless, which at some point in our lives we may find ourselves in that situation. We feel helpless. We feel buried in our vexations, in our troubles. If we remember the teaching, if we remember that our nature, the nature of our mind is free, and if we remember to use a method, use methods to clear our mind, to understand and see how we're suffering, and to clear it, not forcefully, but with wisdom, to clear up these troubles, we'll have more and more confidence. More and more confidence that Zen is our nature. Zen is just our mind. And that the mind that we usually identify with, all the thoughts and the noise that I mentioned in the beginning, all the noise that usually fills our experience, we usually identify with those thoughts. That seems like our mind thinking, and uh, the emotional feelings that go along with that. Through practice, through dedication, we learn to let go of the grip on thought. We let go of the grip on the thinking mind as being ourself. When we let go of the grip on those thoughts, they become quieter. Our mind becomes more and more silent until, as it's said, we see the source of our mind, the source of all these thoughts, all this activity. We return to the source, 还原. Sometimes it's called 还原, 心原. It's returning to the source of mind. Letting go of identifying with thoughts and thinking and words and noise. we learn to let go, and our mind can naturally return to a quiet, clear source that's just inexpressible. There's no words to describe that experience of a truly silent and truly clear mind, because that very experience is without words. There's nothing to say. So this is Zen. Zen is using words to help free us from words, using thoughts to help free us from grasping at thoughts. And by doing that, we realize our nature. We realize a mind that was always there, always uh, ready. It's the silent and clear experience of our moment to moment, day to day life. It's a freed mind, and it's also a compassionate and wise mind. So I'll finish the talk here.